Hello, this is Tyler Richardson doing the final presentation for TE23P on gifted EL students. So to start off, we have a table of contents. We'll go through each one of these slides, and then this video will be linked in the table of contents as well. So why EL? First of all, it is an extremely underrepresented demographic within gifted and talented programs. While the number of EL students, which is English language learners, or ELL, English learner students, is increasing, the amount of students who are represented in gifted and talented programs is not representative of the total demographic numbers. EL is a high need area that qualifies for like title funding, that sort of thing as well. So it is an area that does have a lot of need and definitely could benefit from a lot of research and information. Another reason is I felt in my 4 years or so of teaching EL at this point that a lot of our EL students are not being fairly represented by standardized testing, and because our district does a lot of standardized testing and uses those scores for gifted and talented identification, it's becoming increasingly apparent that that's probably not the way that we should do these things. If we take a look at the graph, the chart, it was set up by Naglieri, who did the NNAT test, which is a nonverbal battery of tests that's a little bit more fair to non-white native English-speaking students. You can see the number of Hispanic students represented, the number of Black students represented, Native American, 2 or more races. Essentially, non-white students are just represented at a much lower margin than what should be. For example, Hispanic students, 778,000, should be closer to 1.2 million. Native American, nearly half. Just vastly underrepresented in gifted and talented programs. So looking at identification, and by identification I mean specifically how we identify gifted and talented students, specifically gifted and talented EL students. And to start off with some of the sort of more negative sides of that, there are a lot of restrictive language requirements within our standardized testing. There's a certain level of language that's almost required in order to be able to access the test and to be able to engage with it. And that level of language acquisition can be extremely difficult for students whose first language is not English. That kind of goes into my second point, limited language experiences in L2. L2 just simply means their second language that they're learning. For most of these students, it's English. And so students who've come into the school system and haven't been here very long just don't have the language experience in English in order to be able to properly engage with our standardized testings. As I previously mentioned, EL students aren't represented to the same rate that demographics would expect them to be. And I think a large part of that is the standardized testing that we do. In order to alleviate that, identification, particularly with EL students, but also with low socioeconomic students, should start to move towards multiple identification methods, such as student work portfolios, which over time is collected to show a high level of expertise and a high level of success for student projects and student works. Nominations, both from peers, teachers, family members, parents, should be taken into consideration. Assessment data is usable and is viable, but it should not be the end-all, be-all for the decision-making process. You can also look at behavior. There's a lot of different factors that can be used for identification that aren't solely test scores, because frankly it's just not fair to the EL students to say that they can't be gifted and talented in something simply because their reading or math score isn't high enough. In particular, their reading score is going to hold a lot of these students back because they're expected to perform at a level where their native English speaking peers should be at, when realistically they may have only been in the country for a couple of years. They may be even gifted in their home language, but there's no way for us to assess that, and there's no way for us to even attempt to figure that out. And so there's a lot of reform that needs to go into identification, in particular when dealing with EL students. And then the last point is just to think about how much time they've had with their L2. If a student's only been here for 2 years and they're already excelling, they're getting good grades and things, they're able to participate in class, they're showing that they have those skills, then it might be less important to see how they do on the standardized test, and maybe they should be in the gifted program where we can kind of nurture those skills more effectively. Support for our EL students. This is in order to support them to be successful in general, as well as how we can support them to better engage with gifted and talented programs and to give them an opportunity to be in those gifted and talented programs. So one of the big things you can do is embrace their L1. That's their home language. In most of my students' case, it's Spanish, but being able to let them work on things in Spanish, letting them explore things in Spanish, giving them opportunity to read Spanish literature, instead of trying to tell them that they need to just forget their home language, not use their home language, embrace that, because there are studies that show that the stronger a student's L1 capability, the more likely they will be to be strong in other languages that they learn. Another support piece is to understand that learning a second language is a lifelong process. It takes several years in order to properly acquire the academic language required to participate effectively within our standardized testing systems. A lot of students will take between 6 months and 2 years to learn their basic communication, like with their peers or what they would say on the playground, but it can take upwards of 5 or 6 years for that academic language to fully come around. And that's if they have that time in school. That depends on how much schooling they have before. There's a lot of factors to take into account there, and understanding that is extremely important in being able to support these students. Our school district utilizes WIN time, W-I-N, which stands for What I Need. And I think it's a really good program. I think it's a really good system. But I think it needs to be utilized more effectively in a broader spectrum. Currently, we have EL students who receive pull-out services that get support in English. We have a specialized curriculum for that. I think supporting the students who are advanced EL students who don't necessarily come to pull-out, but they could benefit from more advanced workloads or more challenging work, I think WIN time could be used for that as well. And it's also important to note that support for EL gifted students is very limited. I could not find a lot of research out there, and it's definitely something that probably should be studied in the future with the way demographics are going, and something that needs to be addressed because the inequities are very apparent. Potential funding programs, investing in innovation. They have a lot of different ways you can use the money, including achievement gaps, increasing college enrollment. It's kind of open-ended. You can sort of decide how you want to use that money. Institute for Educational Sciences has specific grants for EL-oriented content. So that could be gifted EL, that could be how to, assess ELs more efficiently. And then Funds for Teachers is a specific program that allows teachers to choose whatever they like as long as it's educational based, and they get money to research that topic or explore that topic. It's very broad funding and is pretty cool. Case study overview. So Dodge Elementary is where it took place. Grand Island, Nebraska has about 50,000 people. Currently there's 3 gifted students in Dodge, 2 fifth graders and a 3rd grader. The student that I worked with was a 5th grade girl. She was gifted in reading. She only receives services 1 time per week for 30 minutes on each Thursday. According to her and according to the gifted specialists I talked to, the majority of that is just read this, write a little bit about it. So not heavily engaging, not a lot of options present. It's all assigned. Dodge Elementary has about 500 students, so only having 3 gifted students identified in our whole school is a little bit suspect. If you follow that 8% sort of rule, like 4 to 8%, even if you're looking at 500, that's 20 kids that realistically should be in the gifted program. So we have kind of an issue in our district with gifted assessment and gifted support. So the student, when talking to her, this is just set up on purple's her responses. She finds reading the easiest. She doesn't like math, prefers to read. What I found interesting was her expectations of herself do mirror that her parents said. So be a good listener, don't get in trouble, don't be disrespectful, and try to be proficient at least on everything. So the rating score is beginning, developing, proficient, and then advanced. And so her personal goal is to be proficient on everything and no lower than proficient. So she's kind of hard on herself with that. As I mentioned, the gifted support, basically they just give an assignment for reading. They have to answer some questions, and that's it. It's all done virtual, so it's over Zoom. It's not in person. It's very mechanical, and talking with her, she's not a huge fan of it. Talking to her, over a few different times, just kind of here and there. She would like more choice. She would like to be able to choose the things that she reads, choose more challenging materials. Currently, the gifted program I don't think is really fulfilling her needs. And I like to include what makes her happy. So visiting with her grandma, normal kid stuff, playing video games. She plays like Minecraft, Roblox, that kind of stuff. Loves to draw. I have a drawing in my room that is, she asked me one day what she should draw. And so I told her to draw a weird penguin or a weird pelican. And so she drew a pelican standing on one leg, and it had a scarf, and it was just kind of looking odd. And I thought that was pretty impressive. She actually did that over a 15-minute recess time. But she really likes to draw and likes to sleep like any person would. So really an average, like well-adjusted student. Teacher interview, it's really important to note that it was difficult for me to get to any sort of teacher for this. I ended up being in contact with a different gifted specialist who wasn't her gifted specialist. And then when I finally was able to contact her specific gifted specialist, they just told me that they don't spend enough time with her and wouldn't be able to answer any of my questions. And so I thought that was a pretty telling and concerning thing to have happen, considering this is supposed to be their gifted specialist who works with this student to try to explore their needs, and they wouldn't even be able to answer questions about it. So in the end, I had to talk to the classroom teacher, and these were just a couple of questions that I think were highlighted in the list of questions. And she's aware that it's a mentor program, is what she thinks. So mentoring is not what the teacher thinks in that case. So the teacher considers the 30 minutes a week a mentoring program. But there's nothing for them in the school. I've tried to kind of start talking with this particular student and try to give them ideas on how to kind of explore their giftedness and, try to give them ideas and stuff and just, try to engage with them in a sort of mentory sort of way. But there's really nothing for these students to be able to engage with adults or teachers that are in their field or anything like that. And then when asked how she's doing in school, she does well in school. It takes a little bit longer to complete her work. She's just more methodical. I saw that specifically on a test when I was subbing in her classroom the other day. She's very methodical in her work. She wants it to be done correctly, so she takes her time for that to happen. She does love to read. Like I said, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of information from the gifted specialist, so it did have to fall back onto her classroom teacher at the time. They'd only been in school 3.5 months or so there wasn't a whole lot to know. But I found out more information just from talking to the student. So overall interactions, how it went, what could change. Student, very positive. The thing that really surprised me was that she didn't even know she was in a gifted program. So when I talked to her and explained what the program was and why she was seeing this person on Thursday, she thought that it was because of a deficiency and that she was receiving extra help to become better at reading. She didn't even know she was in a gifted program. So that blew my mind a little bit. like I said before, after talking with her, she plays with her peers. She's well-adjusted, has a good sense of humor, likes to play, isn't antisocial, as evidenced through subbing in her class, asks questions, gets clarifications on her test stuff, wants things to be done well. I think the important thing overall with that would be, I think it opened her eyes a little bit to know that she was in a gifted program. And so I think it's changed her like mental trajectory on what she thinks of herself. So I think that's been a positive outcome. And then my interactions with the teacher has just been, thoroughly disappointing. Her gifted specialist didn't know much about her. Her classroom teacher doesn't have any specific gifted support in the classroom. The specialist doesn't work with them. So she tries to find things here and there to kind of enrich, but it's really difficult when we have 22 other kids in the classroom. The classroom teacher mainly just sees her as a regular student who happens to be good at reading. So there isn't really any major considerations for gifted support or to challenge the student to excel. And that's definitely something that I think needs to change and needs to be something with the gifted specialists working in tandem. Just like the EL teachers work in tandem with the classroom teachers to make sure that lessons have that scaffolding that is needed for the EL students to be successful, I think our gifted specialists should be doing the same. The indicators part, this was rather difficult just because of the way our school set up. I really don't have access to her test scores or anything like that. So I just had to go off of a general sort of thing. So above 97th percentile on MAPS and NSCAS for reading or math is how a student gets into the gifted program. There are no other factors. There's no nominations. There's no portfolios. There's nothing. There's nothing else. Students in second grade take the COGAT, and as far as I know, that's never used for anything. They just take it. But even if it is used for something, it has no bearing on whether or not they're able to be in gifted and talented program. So participation in the program is based entirely on the test scores. Obviously, she had to have scored high enough in the reading percentile. We'll see how she does. NSCAS testing is this next week for 5th grade. And so maybe we can glean a little bit more information from that. But yeah, indicators a little bit sparse. So overall, education plan for her, things that she struggles in is math. I think trying to build math into her reading activities or trying to find ways to make math more enjoyable and less rote would be beneficial for her. I think a little bit of extra time in WIN for math practice would be beneficial as well. And for her strengths, just things that we've talked about, give her more challenging content, let her choose her content. More choices would be very beneficial because currently she has basically no choices in anything she does. And I've suggested doing some creative writing, which is tough because she doesn't really have time in school to do that, so it'd be more of a personal basis thing, but I think she likes to do the creative writing, and so trying to expand her reading aptitude into that creative writing world would be a powerful outlet for her to explore her giftedness. And then references. I think overall, the biggest thing to take away from this, and she's not an EL student, by the way. There was no gifted EL students that were identified, which does kind of come back to my beginning part where out of the almost 500 students we have, only 3 students are identified. None of them are EL. And so it really, really kind of opens your eyes on how things are going and how students are identified, who's identified, and the inequity that's present within our current EL gifted programs. EL definitely needs to be revamped when it comes to identification. I think as a district, our gifted and talented program itself needs to be revamped. I think we need to revisit how we identify and how we support. I believe there are currently 3 gifted specialists for the whole district and 1 director for the gifted and talented program, which in a school district that has over 10,000 students is not enough. If we were having the amount that we really technically should have, if we said it's 8%, that's 800 kids that are supposedly being served by 3 people. And, we know that's not the case. That's an insane workload. That's just unreasonable. So in the end, I think we just need to do more research into this, maybe try to start an overhaul of our system as a whole. Thank you very much for listening.